Hey, everybody. Welcome to another How to Succeed podcast. This is the show that helps you get to the top and stay there. And this week, we're talking about how to operationalize your Sandler training and get your sales operations up to speed with Daniel Koo. He is from Revenue Reveal. RevenueReveal.co is the website. He's the founder there, but he has been involved with Sandler over 10 years. He's been in sales operations and all kinds of interesting roles as well. So we're going to talk about how he applies it, how he can help you apply it, and how we can make a difference. Set up this revenue generating machine for your company here with podcast this week. It's brought to you by Sandler, the worldwide leader in sales management and customer service training with over 200 locations. More information at Sandler.com. Here we go. All right, Daniel, tell me a little bit about your experience with Sandler and how you figured out how to operationalize maybe the behavioral and communication processes that we teach in our training.
Yeah, I stumbled across Sandler around 10 years ago. I actually used to work at a sales training company called Sales for Life with a guy by the name of Jamie Shanks. His whole big thing was enabling companies, sales reps on social selling, getting active on LinkedIn. And during that time, we hired a sales trainer who was a big believer in Sandler. He knew everything from upfront contracts to pain funneling and staying behind the pendulum. And he gave me this book, Never Teach a Kid How to Ride a Bicycle or something like that.
You can't
And
teach a kid to ride a bike at a seminar.
yes,
Yes.
it's somewhere in the back, actually. I need to rejig my memory. I read that book and I was like, wow, I knew everything I knew about sales was wrong until that moment. And that's where I dived into the funnel of learning everything about Sandler, listening to podcasts, watching videos, watching old clips, getting into the different books. And throughout the years, I met a guy by the name of Chris Kelly, who's our sales trainer in Toronto. And every sales team I've built, recruited, we've always gone through his training. And he's been a big proponent of me and my Sandler journey, learning everything from crafting a cookbook for myself to training my team on, how do you do an upfront contract as well. So I bleed Sandler to this day.
I love that. And I appreciate you taking some time to talk about it with us, because I think when we talk to clients on this podcast, it's really interesting. I think a couple of good questions to start with in the attitude bucket is, what were some of those common myths and misconceptions that you found in the bike book and then learned that you needed to change in your sales or your sales team from Sandler? Or maybe what was something you wish you had known sooner, either in operationalizing Sandler or in your sales career, that could have really changed the game for you?
Yeah, I think the biggest learning for me in the attitude bucket is I always assumed everyone just came to their job with the right attitude and behavior. I thought, most folks were motivated. They wanted to hit their quota. They knew exactly what it took to have the right attitude. They studied, read books, focused on self-development, and really motivated. It was until I became a leader and a sales manager where I realized, yeah, that's not the right way to think about it. Not everyone comes into it having the right attitude. And so a big thing I learned was, well, how do you operationalize your team to have the right attitude? It was
Mm.
about, whether you're starting from scratch and hiring a team, how do you get them to realize, hey, if you don't have the right attitude, this is not the right role for you? Or even the first 2 weeks, how do you set the upfront contract for this role and talk about, here are the 5 or 10 attitude behaviors you need to be successful in your role? And more importantly, we're going to check in on a one-on-one basis. It's going to be part of your assessment reviews. We're going to listen to calls to make sure you're showing up with confidence and the right attitude as well. And so there's different touch points to make sure your team is following the right attitude. And that was the biggest learning where, yeah, not everyone potentially has the right attitude, but most folks have the right intention. They just need a bit of coaching, enablement, and a bit of help as well.
And I guess if you look at those individual salespeople, do you think that there is a particularly big myth or misconception that you have to maybe put in those upfront contracts and the onboarding? You spent most of your time in SaaS, so maybe I can narrow it down there too. Is there something different about selling SaaS that people get wrong?
I think with selling SaaS, I look at it as, regardless if you're selling SaaS or financial services or manufacturing, selling is selling. It's emotional steps. There's some buyer psychology, and you're trying to align your sales process with a person's buying journey. I think the nuances in SaaS is that SaaS is cool now. So there's an
Mhm.
influx of talent into SaaS. And sometimes we get an influx of talent. There's a gap between a top performer and a laggard performer, right? And
Mm.
with the laggard performer, you have to get them out of the organization or have those hard conversations about what is the right attitude for being successful in this organization. At the same time, it's a conversation about whether it's effort, knowledge, or skills. Are they putting the right effort in? Meaning, for example, on the prospecting side, are they having the right activities? Are they asking for referrals? Are they doing cold callers? On the knowledge side, do they have the right knowledge? Maybe there's a gap in what they learned and they just need more coaching and enablement from that aspect. And then the skill side, hey, maybe the knowledge isn't translating. They haven't built that skill or they haven't had reps yet. So you can spend a lot more time on coaching through that process or even spending time in role playing, right? How do you set up an upfront contract or how do you ask questions down the pain funnel? Uh, I like to look at it from that standpoint.
Now, I want to ask you about revenue reveal because you do some interesting things, and it might take us right into the behavior bucket here, but also from an attitude perspective, what can you set up and measure, and what part is sort of the soft skills, leadership, people side of things? Because I find it always an interesting question that today with AI and everything, people are trying to measure everything and quantify everything and create robots that can do your cold calls for you and stuff. And then there's also some just heart to heart people things. Somebody's having
Yeah.
a bad day or a bad breakup or something, and like that's just going to need a human manager. How do you think about things when you're thinking about operationalizing all this stuff?
Yeah, how I've looked at it is I think there's two things. The one it's for the leader and the second is for the rep. For the leader, I've
Hmm.
always followed a cookbook of things I need to do on a weekly basis to instill the right attitude. So every Sunday I would say for rep named Bob or rep named Sally, I would say I need to provide one affirmation or I need to review one cold email or one cold call or one discovery call and give two pieces of feedback, but also three pieces of positive reinforcement to them. And then that creates a consistent flywheel of listening to calls, providing feedback, helping them get into the right attitude. For the rep itself, I think once you start getting into the motion, whether you're succeeding or not, just building the repetition. And sometimes it's just a numbers game where you get the right attitude, you get the win, and it instills that confidence.
Yeah.
I think with sales, you just have to ride the momentum when you have it. How you quantify attitude, look, I think you have to be human, right? Everyone's going to have a bad day. I always just say, hey, whatever your vision is, let's just work towards it. You're not going to be at your best every minute, every hour, but on the long run, as long as you're striving forward, that's all that matters to me.
Oh, I love what you said there, and it does take us to behavior with cookbook that we can set some goals maybe and reminders to reach out to
Mhm.
our team, but maybe we shouldn't automate the reaching out part, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't create human connection. So tell us about what you do with revenue reveal and how we could maybe operationalize our cookbook or get the data and dashboards in front of us to make better decisions and develop this engine machine.
Yeah, so I'm basically distilling everything I learned in the last 10 years in SaaS from leading business development to field sales to revenue operations. Had a small stint as a CEO, went through two acquisitions in the past couple of years as well. And what I've realized is most sales leaders, most sales teams don't really know how to operationalize their revenue operating system. A lot of
Hmm.
it is, hey, throwing things on a wall, see what sticks, right? Without the data to put it in. How I view it is revenue should be like Moneyball. You have a set of playbooks, processes, data, systems, a sequence of movements and steps, kind of like a dance of sort moving towards the right direction so that you know, hey, based on the problem I have, how do I diagnose the revenue issue I have? How do I break through this growth plateau I have? Or how do I just set a standard operating procedure for my team to grow right there? And so there, a lot of that is human intervention. You need humans to help with the skills aspect of things, following the process, building accountability. But I think AI and all these other various tools can certainly accelerate the process or maybe enhance what humans are doing. Maybe not replace them just yet, but certainly enhance them.
Can you take it another level more detailed, or maybe give us an example of like how the Sandler philosophies get embedded into the tools or the measurements, or how you kind of combine like a company sales process with the methodology with the technology?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll dial it back to how do you measure that as well. So, some of my clients, what they've done is, they've changed their discovery call. But one of the questions they'll ask is, well, how do we know the reps are adopting this new discovery framework, and how do we know it's successful? For
Hmm.
one, we have to measure it. So, how do you measure it? There are various conversation intelligence tools out there like Grain, Gong, or Chorus. And in those, I usually set up trackers. So, for example, in upfront contract, you have your appreciate naturally, obviously, and typically. So, I'll set trackers around appreciate you making the time. Naturally, you'll have questions for me. Obviously, I'll have questions for you, typically at the end, or things like next steps. If it's pain funnel, I'll track things like tell me more about that, or variations of those questions to tell me which reps are actually adopting this methodology, and based on those reps adopting that methodology, how is that impacting the conversion? How is that impacting their win rate? Back to the behavior aspect, if you know reps aren't adopting it and you know the reps that do succeed, you now have data to go back to your rep and ask them, hey, how can we have you adopt this? Is this back to an effort thing, a skill thing, or a knowledge thing? Because we had proven success. And the other aspect, once those calls are recorded, you now have these sound bites of best practices, which you can put into a resource library. If you're hiring new reps, great. You have a great foundation to build things off. If you need to coach these reps, maybe they don't want to listen to their leader or manager. Well, you can listen to your other reps doing best practice as well.
And then I love that. So second to all of that, that was perfect. What about the sales process itself? How do you identify gaps and bottlenecks and where people are getting stuck or their revenue engine is stalling out?
Yeah, I think you got to look at it foundationally as, what does the go-to-market strategy look like from anonymous prospect to close one, right? What are the steps in between? How do you actually convert one to the other? What's the exit criteria? For example, maybe from discovery to demo, you need to identify the business or technical pain. Well, let's put that in Salesforce. That's a question the sales reps have to answer, because if they don't know how to answer what the prospect's pain is, you cannot move them to the next step. You're still stuck in that current step there. And even looking at like moving from demo to proposal stage, have you quantified the pain to justify the impact or the outcome of that investment in buying your SaaS solution or some other solution? And then after that, once you figured out the proposal, what are the steps in the decision process? Who needs to sign a contract? Who needs to be involved? How long does this actually take? Let's mandate that in your CRM or whatever tool you have. And more importantly, let's layer the coaching aspect so they know what questions to ask before it's too late and you're waiting 6 months for a deal when your rep says that deal was supposed to go close 2 months ago.
Yeah. And I guess my next question kind of went wide with a sales team. If you're the leader
Mhm.
or the person trying to decide how to do this or how to track it, what kind of information do you look at as a leader? You've been a CEO or an operations person, sales ops, to know if the team is doing well or if we're forecasting we're going to hit our quarterly number and stuff. Have you gotten into that before?
Yeah, I think if you're asking around metrics and what to track, I usually boil sales or revenue metrics down to three categories: volume, velocity, conversion. At each
Hmm.
stage, do you have the right amount of leads for volume? Velocity, how quickly are the leads moving at each stage? And conversion, how many leads are converting at each stage? I think once you figure that out and have a benchmark, you know if a deal forecasted will close or what your win rate is. If you know your deal cycle is 90 days, but that deal has been sitting in stage discovery for 120 days, my question is, well, let's be honest, is this a real deal or not here? Should you close lost this and move on? You likely should, right?
Yeah, I think so, and that makes a lot of sense. I like those metrics, and especially the velocity one.
Yeah.
People don't seem to watch that as much, but if you're starting to get longer sales cycles, sometimes that can be a symptom of some other things happening, whether it's qualification or other technique problems, which brings us to our last bucket here. So I imagine with operationalizing Sandler, we've talked a lot about some of the techniques that you're using, like CRM or call recorders or onboarding training and stuff. But what comes to mind for you about how we actually pull this off?
Yeah, I think foundationally you need the go-to-market strategy, meaning you've documented your buying process and your sales process. You've actually spoken to customers and validate some of those
Hmm.
ideas as well, rather than gut intuition or potentially gut feeling of, I think this is right. Then you got to, based on that sales process and buyer foundation, build the playbooks. So from discovery, what are the questions you need to ask? What's your upfront contract for discovery as well? What are the top 3 to 5 paying funnel questions you need to ask? What is your upfront contract for the next call afterwards? I think most buyers, if you're selling something new or innovative, they don't know how to buy. They don't know what the next steps are. They don't know how to allocate budget for something like this. They don't know who to speak with. So you kind of have to figure that out and guide the buyer in that standpoint as well. And then once you have those established steps in the sales process and playbooks, I look at it from an enablement perspective. Does your team have the skills to actually guide a buyer through that process? Do they have the right tone in their calls? Do they have the right behaviors on their calls? Do they know what to say or how to say it on their calls as well? Do they have the script or the frameworks to do so? And then a layer below that is the technology, right? Is everything being tracked? Is it being reinforced? Are all the things collected just so you can make those judgments on, hey, we need to improve the team on discovery process, or potentially we need to get more volume of leads at the top of funnel because they're absolutely killing it for what their win rates. So after layer after that is just the data foundation, right? Just making sure you're tracking volume, velocity, conversion. Those you can then break down from, meeting booked to meeting show rate. That's your conversion. That's your velocity as well. So you can get a bit granular on that. So that's how I think about operationalizing the technique aspect. Of course, a lot of that has to sit into a CRM or other tech as well.
Yeah, you mentioned playbooks, and I
Mhm.
found a lot of people have used a lot of different techniques for this. But how are you collecting, testing, figuring out the plays that need to be in there? And then how are you organizing them and distributing out to the team to make sure that they can, find the right play at the right time?
Yeah, with the playbook aspect, there's always a metric you're trying to improve. I'll give you an
Mm.
example. One client I had where their booked meeting to show rate was now 55, 60%. They want to get to 70%. Well, there are a couple of things we can test in that playbook. For one, they booked the meeting and never followed up and expected folks to show up on that call. Well, the one thing we test is, well, let's just add a follow-up email. Thank you for accepting this meeting. Really looking forward to this meeting. Oh, and here's the agenda of the 3 things we want to talk about during that meeting as well. That way they can have an expectation to show up. Let's test that for 2 weeks, see how it improves or not. Boom, 10% increase. Great. Let's add that to the playbook. Now let's test the next thing where we're adding a questionnaire to that follow up. We want them to input answers to the top 10 questions we want to ask to
Little
contextualize
homework.
the discovery call. A bit of homework, correct, Sandler methodology, yes. One, it qualifies the buyer to see if they're a legit buyer or not. And two, it gives us a lot more ample information to use in that discovery call and hopefully help them through that process as well. If that works, great. Let's add that to the playbook as well. So we're choosing the one metric. We have a hypothesis on what works or what doesn't work. We set the variable on what to test, and we set a time frame of how long we're testing. And after that time frame, let's look at the results. And all these learnings before they're in the playbook itself, we want to make sure we disperse the learning across the team. That way, if they have ideas they want to add, we can certainly adopt them. Or if they want to debate an idea or add something else, we can adopt or challenge that as well. And then once you have the playbook, let's mandate it across the sales process. One, let's train the team on what is the new way of doing things versus the old way of doing things, what the results were so they can buy into this new behavior rather than blindlessly going into it. Let's mandate this behavior, mandate this change in our technology stack. Let's put it in all our Google Drives, sales enablement libraries, just so it's accessed and everywhere. And let's just set a cadence, you know, once every week or bi-weekly for the next 2 months. Let's make sure this behavior is being adopted across the team. Um, that way we can see a real change and make the real impact.
Great stuff there. I mean, really good. I would encourage everybody to think about that and how you're improving your revenue generating machine here. Daniel, I wanted to ask you before we get to learn more about you and have some fun with this. I'm interested in your Sandler techniques. Have you found in selling SaaS or in your career one technique that jumped out that's more powerful than the others? It sounded like you shouted out upfront contracts several times there. If I was going to guess what you were going to say, I would pick that. But anything else that you would say as far as like Sandler techniques?
Yeah, it's interesting you picked up the upfront contract. I would say beyond that, it's pain funnel. Just the simple process of the open-ended questions you ask to get to a concise and targeted answer of what are the top 3 to 5 pain points or problems that if someone's going through. There's such a strong fundamental aspect where if you don't have pain, there's no sale, and you're wasting cycles trying to chase a prospect who will likely ghost you because they don't have pain point to solve. The folks that do have actual pain, that's where you prioritize and that's where you double down on because there's something you can solve, there's something you can qualify. And I found pain funneling, once you do it right, once you go through the motion, contextualize the questions you ask for your company or your role. That's such a powerful thing I found throughout my career.
Good stuff. Again, we're talking with Daniel Koo, founder of Revenue Reveal. Check him out at revenuereveal.co. And I wanted to get to know you a little bit more and just, we shared a little bit about your career, but how do you define success for yourself at this point? You've been successful already and 10 years in Sandler. I think it's interesting to kind of reset what the next level is for you.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider myself successful. I think success is a continuously moving milestone you gotta chase. Every year I start the year by doing a 1-3-5 year plan of what success looks like, and so I always define what are things I need to do physically, mentally, emotionally, relationship wise, career wise. I think for myself, the big definition of success would be how do I do, which is Revenue Reveal, the company I started, I want to say 100, 120 days ago. How do we grow this to be the go-to expert in building a revenue operating function? How do we make this the standard of what revenue and success looks like? How do we support organizations who either want to explode their growth or have hit multiple growth plateaus and just want to get past that? How do we give them that confidence and aha moment of, oh yeah, we've solved this? I think that to me is the success right now, and that's what I'm striving towards.
Nice. And what about the flip side of that question? Was there a biggest failure or lesson learned along the way that was a
Yeah,
particularly hard hurdle to get over?
yeah. The one thing that has always stood out to me is I'm a classic introvert. If you look at
Right.
the disc profile, high C, mild D, so I tend to be a bit analytical, and so I think for me, my biggest failure, or potentially if you want to flip failure into opportunity to learn and improve, is I've always been someone who is quite reserved and conservative and don't speak up enough or don't share my opinions or have the conviction, whether it's in boardrooms with my team or with other executives in the companies I work with. So I'd say that's one thing where I've always tried to get past a hurdle. I guess it goes back to the attitude aspect of things as well, of just having the confidence to speak up. Toastmasters has helped. I've done improv as well. That has certainly helped me speak up in front of my peers. So yeah, trying to
Nice.
continuously grow there.
How long have you been doing improv or did it?
I think it was a 3 month course every week for 3 months. A lot of yes and things, a lot of, just getting out of the comfort zone.
Good. That's awesome. Do you have a favorite Sandler rule quote or lesson that you try to remember?
Yeah, I guess given we've spoken a lot about discovery, pain funnel, everything, my favorite Sandler rule is people don't argue with their own data. Uh, the goal is to ask them the right questions so they can self-discover themselves the answer or the pain point. So that has always been something I think about.
Good stuff. And surprising, the high C likes the data rule.
Exactly,
All
right?
right. I appreciate you taking the time to share with us. Again, Daniel Koo, revenuereveal.co. If you'd like more information on Sandler, you can find a local office like Chris did with, Daniel did with Chris Kelly in Toronto. You can go to sandler.com, click on find a training location. We also have an enterprise team that works with large international organizations to figure that out. And if you want to share this episode with the leader that you think needs to hear it, that would help us out a ton. Give us a 5-star review or make sure you're subscribed to the podcast if you aren't already. Until next time, whatever you are, be a good. And the podcast is brought to you by Sandler, the worldwide leader in sales management and customer success training all around the world. More information at sandler.com. Goodbye, everybody.